It's 8.5 to 8.
This is Breakfast with Dan and Jenny on ABC Newcastle.
It's important that we protect people with disabilities from exploitation, discrimination. But how do we make sure that aside from that protection, that they're actually positive, proactive measures that support inclusion, give them every opportunity they deserve? There were more than 200 recommendations to consider within the Royal Commission into the violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with a disability.
And among those recommendations, right at the front of all that, was the recommendation for a new Disability Rights Act. What could that achieve? The University of Newcastle's Dr. David Roy is passionate about this, has written an article for The Conversation, and he's here this morning. Good morning, Dr. Roy.
Good morning, Jenny. Good morning, Dan.
What is a Disability Rights Act?
So, a Disability Rights Act is something that would build upon the already current Disability Discrimination Act, except it builds upon the original United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with a Disability. It's basically proactive. If there's a Discrimination Act, it's to react against something that has gone wrong when people haven't been treated equally. But a Rights Act enshrines that companies, employers, providers have to take into account what are the needs of people with a disability before they have to even engage with people with a disability. And it means that people with a disability have a sense of control about what they actually require. So it's a proactive system that actually will change what we have in place rather than just potentially reinforcing disadvantage already there.
In your view, then, what would it need to be effective? What kind of formulation and elements would it mean to actually do as it would be designed to do?
Well, what it firstly needs is it needs the voices of people with a disability actually being consulted as part of the process of what is required. What we need to take on board is basically the United Nations Conventions of Rights that we've actually already ratified as a nation and just now apply them in all aspects of our life. So it would actually kind of umbrella cover all the different challenges and issues that came up from the 222 recommendations when they say, well, we're not providing a proper wage for people with employment with a disability. Well, the Rights Act would say, well, that has to be changed because you're actually in breach. So again, it would mean every aspect of society would have to be looked at to make sure that people with a disability were included and seen as an equal part of society, which they're not just now.
You mentioned the difference between the Discrimination Act and a Rights Act. If it's more proactive, what then, I know you say you want the voices included. What do you see as one of the first parts of this? What do you want to see begin now?
I want to see basically the politicians and from both federal and state say to make reactions, because remember, it's not just Canberra that has to react to this commission, it's also the New South Wales State Parliament has to react to it to see how they're going to need to change their laws and the way they implement things. And then to start saying, when we develop trains or when we build buildings, that they are fully accessible. It's still ironic to me that when Senator Jordan Steele arrived in Canberra, he couldn't access the parliamentary building that he was meant to create laws in because it wasn't accessible for him in a wheelchair. So it's really simple things like that that we've said before, well, we'll try to make changes if we can. Now we would have to make changes to be fully inclusive, and that would include for schools as well.
Well, on that, your area of study takes in education. Yeah. Would a Disability Rights Act affect the education of people with a disability?
Oh, absolutely, because you cannot therefore deny people access into mainstream schools. So we would have to rethink the whole way that we run schools. And this is one of the major, I guess, discussions going on, because there was that discussion about the different types of setting we have, of fully inclusive into mainstream or integrated or separate schools, sometimes referred to as segregated. And the fact that we have these different systems is technically the United Nations has said is a breach of the conventions. And our rights would probably say that families have the right to insist that their child goes to a mainstream school, which will change the whole way that we run schools. Because currently, mainstream schools are not set up to be fully inclusive.
Right. So serious change is needed. But Dr. Roy, that sounds expensive. Are you worried that money would stop a government from overhauling our education system to ensure there isn't segregation?
Well, I think it's not just money, it's also the resourcing of actual staffing. We don't have enough teachers now just for the kids that are in all the schools. And we would need significantly more teachers and more training to really meet those needs. So we need to have a massive attitudinal change across our community about how we view teaching, how we view schools, and raise that status of the quality teachers that we have and make it a desirable occupation to go to. And yeah, funding is going to be a big issue, and we're going to have to make choices about, do we educate kids the way that we need to, or do we buy more Tomahawk missiles? It's going to be those kind of decisions that will have to be made at the highest levels of government. And that's something as a society we're just going to have to debate with.
Dr. Roy, it's a really interesting conversation. The article is well worth a read. Thank you for talking to us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
The University of Newcastle's Dr. David Roy there. He has written an article for the conversation. Jump online to have a read, but his expertise is in education, but he is calling for that Disability Rights Act to get started straight away.
It is windy today. We have a severe weather warning for damaging winds, so take care. I'm seeing that there are delays at airports to Sydney, particular is what I'm seeing.